This is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and in this video we're going to continue our study of Homer's Iliad, reading Book 4. In Book 3, we read of the duel, or the anticipated duel, between Menelaus and Paris. We know that Menelaus had taken hold of Paris and was probably about to kill him, but Paris was rescued by a goddess. Maybe you can think of what the goddess's name was that rescued Paris. That goddess was Venus, or Aphrodite, the god of beauty, the goddess of beauty. She rescued Paris from Menelaus's grasp and carried him away, made him invisible, as it were, and carried him away back to the palace where he was safe, and then led Helen back to Paris. Well, after that had happened, Menelaus was obviously angry because he had overtaken Paris and was about to defeat him, which would have brought an end to the war, but then this divine intervention took place, and if you remember, Menelaus complained because it seemed unjust that Paris, who had committed the sin that led to this whole war in Troy, seemed to be defended and protected by the gods rather than punished for his evil deeds. And Menelaus complained, Agamemnon complained, and that leads us to Book 4. So let's go ahead and get started in Book 4. You can see in the document on the course page, we're on page 100, and we're picking up in Book 4. We read the breach of the truce and the first battle. Book 4 of Homer's Iliad. We'll try to get through the whole book in one video. And now, Olympus's shining gates unfold, the gods with Jove assume their thrones of gold. Immortal Hebe, fresh with bloom divine, the golden goblet crowns with purple wine. While thee full bowls flow round, the powers employ their careful eyes on long contended Troy. When Jove, Jupiter, the chief of the gods, disposed to tempt Saturnia's spleen, thus waked the fury of his partial queen. Two powers divine, the son of Atreus, aid, imperial Juno, and the martial maid. But high in heaven they sit and gaze from far, the tame spectators of his deeds of war. Not thus fair Venus helps her favored knight, the queen of pleasures shares the toils of fight. Each danger wards, and constant in her care saves in the moment of the last despair. Her act has rescued Paris's forfeit life, though great Atrides gained the glorious strife. Then say, ye powers, what signal issue waits to crown this deed and finish all the fates? So the goddesses who support the sons of Atreus, they're criticized by Jupiter, who says, I'm watching what's going on here, and I see Venus down there helping her favorite men. She went down there and rescued Paris when he was in trouble, but you goddesses are up here doing nothing and leaving the sons of Atreus to fight in vain. And you can see Menelaus' complaint was just. Even Jupiter agrees that the gods are not helping the man whom they should be helping, and meanwhile the unjust Paris is being helped by Venus. Jupiter echoes that in heaven. Shall heaven by peace the bleeding's kingdoms spare, or rouse the furies and awake this war? Yet would the gods for human good provide, Atrides soon might gain his beauteous bride. If the gods would intervene, he says, Atreus, the sons of Atreus would probably quickly win this war. Still, Priam's walls in peaceful honors grow, and through his gates the crowding nations flow. The gods need to act. Thus, while he spoke, the Queen of Heaven enraged, and Queen of War in close consult engaged. Apart they sit, their deep designs employ, and meditate the future woes of Troy. Though secret anger swelled Minerva's breast, so one of the goddesses here, I didn't mention who it was because I knew that Homer would get to it. Here we see the martial maid that he refers to is Minerva, or Athena, the goddess of wisdom. The prudent goddess yet her wrath suppressed. So notice it explains how Minerva, because she's wise, she's angry, but she keeps it within herself, whereas Juno, impotent of passion, broke her sullen silence and with fury spoke. So the two goddesses who favor the sons of Atreus are roused to anger by Jupiter, and Juno speaks. Shall then, O tyrant of the ethereal reign, my schemes, my labors, and my hopes be vain? Have I for this shook Ilion with alarms, assembled nations, set two worlds in arms? You're saying I've done nothing? I've organized this whole battle. To spread the war, I flew from shore to shore. The immortal coursers, the horses of the gods, scarce the labor bore. At length, ripe vengeance o'er their heads impends, but Jove himself this faithless race defends. So Juno blames Jupiter. Loth as thou art to punish lawless lust, not all the gods are partial and unjust. So she turns it back on Jupiter. The sire, that is Jupiter, whose thunder shakes the cloudy skies, sighs from his inmost soul and thus replies. O lasting rancor, O insatiate hate, to Phrygia's monarch and the Phrygian state. What high offense has fired the wife of Jove? Can wretched mortals harm the powers above? Pay attention to the religious lessons in the text. Can wretched mortals harm the powers above? That Troy and Troy's whole race thou wouldst confound, and yon fair structures level with the ground? Why punish the people? They can't do any harm to the gods, so why destroy their city? Haste, leave the skies, fulfill thy stern desire, burst all her gates and wrap her walls in fire. Let Priam bleed. If yet you thirst for more, bleed all his sons, and let Ilion float with gore. Remember, Ilion is the Greek name for Troy. To boundless vengeance thee wide realm be given, till vast destruction glut or fills, satisfies the Queen of Heaven. So let it be, and Jove his peace enjoy, when heaven no longer hears the name of Troy. So Jupiter signs off on this plan to destroy Troy. But should this arm prepare to wreak our hate on thy loved realms whose guilt demands their fate, presume not thou the lifted bolt to stay. Remember Troy, and give the vengeance way. For know, of all the numerous towns that rise beneath the rolling sun and starry skies, which gods have raised or earth-born men enjoy, none stands so dear to Jove as sacred Troy. No mortals merit more distinguished grace than god-like Priam, or than Priam's race. Still, to our name their hecatombs expire, and altars blaze with unextinguished fire. In other words, Troy was loved by Jupiter, And this is important because remember, we met Aeneas in the last book, and I said that he would become the main character of Virgil's Aeneid. He becomes the legendary founder of the Roman people. So notice that the Trojans were beloved by Jupiter, and Aeneas was one of those Trojan men. Keep that in mind later when we get to Virgil's poem. At this, the goddess rolled her radiant eyes, and then on the thunderer fixed them and replies. So this is another one of these quarrels between Jupiter and Juno, husband and wife. 3 towns are Juno's on the Grecian plains, more dear than all the extended earth contains, Mycenae, Argos, and the Spartan wall. So we learn here that Jupiter favored 3 cities, Mycenae, Argos, and Sparta. It's important for Greek history to understand that the Greeks believed that Juno, the queen of heaven, favored these 3 cities. Jupiter favored Troy. These cities thou mayest raze, or burn to the ground, nor I forbid their fall. 'Tis not in me the vengeance to remove, the crimes sufficient that they share my love. Of power superior, why should I complain? Resent I may, but I must resent in vain. Yet some distinction Juno might require, sprung with thyself from one celestial sire, a goddess born to share the realms above, and styled the consort or wife of the thundering Jove. Nor thou a wife and sister's right deny, let both consent and both by terms comply. So shall the gods our joint decrees obey, and heaven shall act as we direct the way. See, ready Pallas, Athena, or Minerva, waits thy high commands, to raise in arms the Greek and Phrygian or Trojan bands. Their sudden friendship by her arts may cease, and the proud Trojans first infringe the peace. In other words, let the Trojans break the truce between the Greeks and the Trojans, and let this war begin. The sire of men, the father, sire, father of men, and monarch of the sky, the advice approved, and bade Minerva fly. Just remember, keep these names in mind. Minerva, Pallas, Athena, all refer to the same goddess. Juno, queen of heaven, refer to the wife of Jupiter. Jupiter is also referred to as Jove, the thunderer, the monarch of the sky, and so on. Try to keep their names clear in your head. So Jupiter approves this plan and gives permission for Minerva to go and start this war up. Dissolve the league, that is, break the truce, and all her arts of wisdom and military strategy employ to make the breach the faithless act of Troy. Let them be guilty of the breach. Fired with the charge, she headlong urged her flight and shot like lightning from Olympus' height. Notice a simile here, as the red comet from Saturnius sent to fright the nations with a dire portent, a fatal sign to armies on the plain, or trembling sailors on the wintry main. With sweeping glories glides along in air and shakes the sparkles from its blazing hair. Between both armies thus in open sight shot the bright goddess in a trail of light. So Athena actually appeared to the armies as a comet, as it were. Shot the bright goddess in a trail of light. With eyes erect, the gazing hosts, the armies, admire the power descending and the heavens on fire. The gods, they cried, the gods this signal sent, and fate now labors with some vast event. Jove seals the league. Jove either confirms the agreement between the Greeks and Trojans, or bloodier scenes prepares. Jove, the great arbiter, or judge of peace and wars. They spoke, while Pallas, through the Trojan throng in shape like a mortal, passed disguised along. So Athena the goddess is disguised as a man. Like bold Laodocus, her course she bent, who from Antenor traced his high descent. Amidst the ranks Lycaon's son she found, the warlike Pandarus for strength renowned, whose squadrons led from black Aesepus' flood, with flaming shields in martial circle stood. To him the goddess spoke. Phrygian, canst thou hear a well-timed counsel with a willing ear? What praise were thine? What praise would be yours? Couldst thou direct thy dart amidst his triumph to the Spartan's heart? So Athena says to this man, what praise would you receive if you could secretly aim and fire an arrow and strike Menelaos in the heart? What gifts from Troy, from Paris wouldst thou gain, thy country's foe, the Grecian glory slain? So she arouses this Trojan man to consider breaking the truce by shooting Menelaos with an arrow. Then seize the occasion, dare the mighty deed, aim at his breast, and may that aim succeed. But first, to speed the shaft, address thy vow to Lycian Phoebus with the silver bow, that's the god Apollo, and swear the firstlings of thy flock to pay on Zalia's altars to the god of day, that is again Apollo. So notice here the role of vows in Greek religion. If you want the gods to help you, make a significant promise that you'll fulfill if the gods assist you. That's what a vow is, a promise to the gods. So make a vow, pray for Apollo to guide your arrow, as it were, and take a shot at Menelaos. He heard, and madly at the motion pleased, his polished bow with hasty rashness. Notice the vice or the weakness that's described in him. That's what Athena was looking for. His polished bow with hasty rashness seized. 'Twas formed of horn, and smoothed with artful toil. A mountain goat resigned the shining spoil, who pierced long since beneath his arrows bled. The stately quarry on the cliffs lay dead. Describing his bow. And 16 palms his brow's large honors spread. The workmen joined and shaped the bended horns, and beaten gold each taper point adorns. Again, just a description of this bow of this man. This by the Greeks unseen, the warrior bends, screened by the shields of his surrounding friends. There meditates the mark, and couching low, fits the sharp arrow to the well-strung bow. One from 100 feathers deaths he chose. So he pulls a feathered arrow from his quiver, fated to wound and cause of future woes. Then offers vows with hecatombs to crown Apollo's altars in his native town. Now with full force the yielding horn he bends, drawn to an arch, and joins the doubling ends. Close to his breast he strains the nerve below, till the barbed points approach the circling bow. He pulls back his arrow on the string. The impatient weapon whizzes on the wing. Notice the alliteration there. The impatient weapon whizzes on the wing. Sounds the tough horn and twangs the quivering string. But thee a Atrides, that is Menelaus, in that dangerous hour the gods forget not, nor thy guardian power, Pallas, Athena, assists, and weakened in its force, diverts the weapon from its destined course. So from her babe, when slumber seals his eye, the watchful mother, here we have another simile, the watchful mother wafts an envenomed fly. So as a mother brushes a fly away from the face of a baby, just where his belt, Menelaus, with golden buckles joined, where linen folds the double corslet lined, she turned the shaft, which, hissing from above, past the broad belt, and through the corslet drove. So she aroused, or she incited this Trojan man to take a shot at at Menelaus, and encouraged him to even make a vow to Apollo. She deceived him, thinking that he could do it and that Apollo would help him, when she knew all along it wouldn't work. And then she actually diverted the arrow and protected Menelaus. The folds the arrow, pierced, and plated linen tore, and raised the skin, and drew the purple gore, that is the blood. As when, another simile, as when some stately trappings are decreed to grace a monarch on his bounding steed, a nymph in Caria or Maeonia bred stains the pure ivory with a lively red. With equal luster various colors vie, the shining whiteness and the Tyrian dye. So great Atrides showed thy sacred blood, as down thy snowy thigh, down his white leg distilled the streaming flood of blood. With horror seized, the king of men descried the shaft infixed, and saw the gushing tide. Nor less the Spartan feared. So just to clarify, king of men there refers to Agamemnon. The Spartan refers to Menelaus. Nor less the Spartan feared before he found the shining barb appear above the wound. Then with a sigh that heaved his manly breast, the royal brother thus his grief expressed, and grasped his hand, while all the Greeks around with answering sighs returned the plaintive or complaining sound. O dear as life, did I for this agree, the solemn truce a fatal truce to thee, wert thou exposed to all the hostile train, to fight for Greece and conquer to be slain. The race of Trojans in thy ruin join, and faith is scorned by all the perjured line. So Agamemnon is angry because the truce that they had made was not only broken, which would be bad enough, but it was broken by a shot being taken at his brother. So he refers to the Trojans as the perjured line, that is the truce-breaking, dishonest people. Not thus our vows, confirmed with wine and gore, confirmed with feasting, with sacrifice and wine being offered. They made vows, they agreed to a truce. Those hands we plighted, those oaths we swore, shall be in vain when heaven's revenge is slow. Jove but prepares to strike the fiercer blow. The day shall come, that great avenging day, when Troy's proud glories in the dust shall lay, when Priam's powers and Priam's self shall fall, and one prodigious ruin swallow all. I see the god already from the pole bare his red arm and bid the thunder roll. I see the Eternal all his fury shed, and shake his aegis o'er their guilty head. Such mighty woes on perjured princes wait, but thou, alas, you, Menelaus, Agamemnon says, deservest a happier fate. You don't deserve this. Remember, Menelaus was the one who was wronged in the beginning. Here he is, struck with an arrow. Agamemnon says, "You don't deserve this fate. Still, must I mourn the period of thy days, and only mourn without my share of praise? Deprived of thee, my brother, the heartless Greeks no more shall dream of conquests on this hostile shore. Troy seized of Helen, and our glory lost, thy bones shall moulder on a foreign coast, while some proud Trojan thus insulting cries, and spurns the dust where Menelaus lies." Pope's poetry here is so beautiful. "Such are the trophies Greece from Ilion brings, and such the conquest of her king of kings." In other words, all I bring back from Troy are the bones of my brother. "Lo, his proud vessels scattered o'er the main, and unrevenged, his mighty brother slain. Oh, ere that dire disgrace shall blast my fame, o'erwhelm me, earth, and hide a monarch's shame." Agamemnon spoke. A leader's and a brother's fears possess his soul, which thus the Spartan cheers. It looks like Menelaus replies here to Agamemnon. "Let not thy words the warmth of Greece abate. The feeble dart is guiltless of my fate. Stiff with the rich embroidered work around, my varied belt repelled the flying wound." Menelaus assures Agamemnon that he's going to be okay because um, his belt redirected the arrow, so he's okay. To whom the king Agamemnon replied, "My brother and my friend, thus always thus may heaven thy life defend. Now seek some skillful hand whose powerful art may stanch the effusion and extract the dart." So here we're getting into a little bit of ancient Greek medicine. "Herald, be swift, and bid Machaon bring his speedy succor to the Spartan king." So he must be a physician of some kind. "Pierced with a winged shaft, the deed of Troy, the Grecians' sorrow and the Dardans' joy. With hasty zeal, the swift Talthybius flies, the herald. Through the thick files he darts his searching eyes, looking for the physician, and finds Machaon, where sublime he stands, in arms encircled with his native bands. Then thus the herald speaks, 'Machaon, to the king repair, his wounded brother claims thy timely care. Pierced by some Lycian or Dardanian bow, a grief to us, a triumph to the foe. The heavy tidings, the bad news, grieved the godlike man.'" Notice the physician is referred to as godlike. "Swift to his succor or help, through the ranks he ran. The dauntless king yet standing firm he found, and all the chiefs in deep concern around. Where to the steely point the reed was joined, the shaft he drew, but left the head behind. Straight the broad belt with gay embroidery graced, he loosed the belt, the corslet from his breast unbraced. Then sucked the blood, and sovereign balm infused, which Chiron gave, and Aesculapius used." Aesculapius is um, the great Greek physician who revealed the medical arts to the Greeks, and so we see that he used an Aesculapian remedy to treat the wound in Menelaus's leg. "While round the prince the Greeks employ their care, the Trojans rush tumultuous to the war. Once more they glitter in refulgent or shining arms. Once more the fields are filled with dire alarms. Nor had you seen the king of men appear, confused, unactive, or surprised with fear. Agamemnon was not afraid, but fond of glory, with severe delight his beating bosom, his heart beating claimed the rising fight. No longer with his warlike steeds he stayed, or pressed the car with polished brass inlaid, but left Eurymedon the reins to guide. The fiery coursers snorted at his side. On foot through all the martial ranks he moves, and these encourages and those reproves. Brave men, he cries, to such who boldly dare urge their swift steeds to face the coming war. Notice that rhyme there that I mentioned in Book 3. Your ancient valor on the foes approve. Jove is with Greece, and let us trust in Jove. 'Tis not for us, but for guilty Troy to dread. We should not fear. We're in the right here. We have just cause. Troy should be the one who fears because they're guilty, whose crimes sit heavy on her perjured head. Her sons and matrons Greece shall lead in chains, and her dead warriors strew the mournful, the sorrowful plains. Thus with new ardor he the brave inspires, or thus the fearful with reproaches fires. Notice the role of a leader, to inspire the brave and to reproach the timid or fearful. Shame to your country, scandal of your kind, born to the fate ye well deserve to find. Why stand ye gazing round the dreadful plain, prepared for flight? Why are you ready to run away, but doomed to run away in vain? Confused and panting thus, the hunted deer falls as he flies, a victim to his fear. Still must ye wait the foes and still retire, till yon tall vessels blaze with Trojan fire? Or trust ye, Jove a valiant foe shall chase, to save a trembling, heartless, dastard race? He says, if you're not courageous, do you think that Jupiter is going to save a cowardly man, cowardly people? This said, he stalked with ample strides along to Crete's brave monarch and his martial throng, his military unit. High at their head he saw the chief appear, and bold Meriones excite the rear. At this the king with generous joy expressed, and clasped the warrior to his armed breast. Divine Idomeneus, what thanks we owe to worth like thine, what praise shall we bestow? To thee the foremost honors are decreed, first in the fight and every graceful deed. For this in banquets, when the generous bowls restore our blood and raise the warriors' souls, though all the rest with stated rules be bound, unmixed, unmeasured are thy goblets crowned. Be still thyself in arms a mighty name, maintain thy honors and enlarge thy fame. So this Cretan leader Idomeneus was found ready to go to war, and therefore Agamemnon praises him. To whom the Cretan, that is Idomeneus, thus his speech addressed. Secure of me, O king, exhort the rest. In other words, don't worry about me, I'm ready to go. Go get the others ready. Fixed to thy side, in every toil I share, thy firm associate in the day of war. But let the signal be this moment given, to mix in fight is all I ask of heaven. The field shall prove how perjuries succeed, and chains or death avenge the impious deed. So the penalties of crimes committed is chains or death, slavery, or the loss of your life. Charmed by this heat, the king Agamemnon his course pursues, going on through his men, getting them ready for battle. Next, the troops of either Ajax views. Remember, Ajax was described in Book 3 as an incredibly powerful, strong soldier and leader. In one firm orb the bands were ranged around, orb is circle. The bands were gathered around in a circle, a cloud of heroes blackened all the ground. Thus from the lofty promontory's brow a swain surveys the gathering storm below. Slow from the main the heavy vapors rise, spread in dim streams and sail along the skies, Homer here describing the scene. Till black as night the swelling tempest shows, the cloud condensing as the west wind blows. He dreads the impending storm and drives his flock to the close covert of an arching rock. Such and so thick the embattled squadrons stood, with spears erect and a moving iron wood. A shady light was shot from glimmering shields, and their brown arms obscured the dusky fields. O heroes, worthy such a dauntless train, whose godlike virtue we but urge in vain, exclaimed the king, Agamemnon, who raise your eager bands with great examples more than loud commands. Ah, would the gods but breathe in all the rest such souls as burn in your exalted breast. The king is just praising his soldiers for their bravery, knowing that they're ready to go to war. Soon should our arms with just success be crowned, and Troy's proud walls lie smoking on the ground. Then to the next the general bends his course, his heart exults and glories in his force. Their reverend Nestor ranks his Pylian bands and with inspiring eloquence commands. Notice the use of eloquence in leading men. Notice the importance of this rousing speech from Agamemnon. Leaders have to be eloquent. They have to be persuasive speakers who can gather men together and mobilize their followers to action by stirring them up through eloquent speeches. With strictest order sets his train in arms, the chiefs he advises, and the soldiers he warns. Alastor, Chromius, Haemon round him wait, Bias the good and Pelagon the great. The horse and chariots to the front assigned, the foot, the strength of war he ranged behind. The middle space suspected troops supply, in other words, soldiers who weren't trustworthy were put in the middle of the ranks so they couldn't run away. Enclosed by both, nor left the power to fly. He gives commands to curb the fiery steed, nor cause confusion, nor the ranks exceed. Before the rest, let none too rashly ride, no strength nor skill, but just in time be tried. The charge once made, no warrior turn the rein, but fight or fall, a firm embodied train. He whom the fortune of the field shall cast from forth his chariot mount the next in haste, nor seek unpracticed to direct the car, content with javelins to provoke the war. Our great forefathers held this prudent course, thus ruled their ardor, thus preserved their force. By laws like these, immortal conquests made, and earth's proud tyrants low in ashes laid. So let's follow the strategies and practices of our ancestors because they made great conquests, and we know that their methods are tried and true. So spoke the master of the martial art, and touched with transport great Atrides' heart. So his words got Agamemnon excited. Oh, hadst thou strength to match thy brave desires, and nerves to second what thy soul inspires. Nestor was an old man, so while he could give good counsel and stir up his soldiers to battle, he couldn't fight much himself because of his age. But wasting years, Agamemnon says, that wither human race, exhaust thy spirits, and thy arms unbrace, make you weak. What once thou wert, oh, ever mightst thou be, and age the lot of any chief but thee. Thus to the experienced prince Atrides cried, Agamemnon spoke. He shook his hairy locks, his his white hair, and thus replied, this is Nestor. Well might I wish, could mortal wish renew. If only the wish of a mortal man could renew his youth, I would do it. Such as I was, when Eruthalion slain, beneath this arm, beneath my arm, fell prostrate on the plain. But heaven its gifts not all at once bestows, these years with wisdom crowns, with action those. So my young years were blessed with great accomplishments, but now my old years are blessed with wisdom. These years with wisdom crowns, but action those years. The field of combat fits the young and bold man. The solemn council best becomes the old man. To you the glorious conflict I resign. Let sage advice, the palm of age, be mine. I'll be here to give counsel, but unfortunately I can't help much in battle because of my age. He said, thus he spoke. With joy the monarch Agamemnon marched before and found Menestheus on the dusty shore, with whom the firm Athenian phalanx, a phalanx is the military unit made up of heavily armed soldiers with long spears that formed like a porcupine, I guess we could say, and would march into battle all together with all of their shields and armor united and their spears out in front to fight the opposing army. That's called a phalanx. That's the organization of the military unit. Next, Ulysses, Odysseus, with his subject bands from Ithaca. Remote their forces lay, nor knew so far the peace infringed, nor heard the sounds of war. The tumult late begun, they stood intent to watch the motion, dubious of the event, so they weren't prepared because they hadn't heard the alarm. The king, who saw their squadrons yet unmoved, with hasty ardor thus the chiefs reproved. Can Peleus' son forget a warrior's part, and fears Ulysses, skilled in every art? Why stand you distant, and the rest expect to mix in combat which yourselves neglect? What are you going to watch? He says. From you 'twas hoped among the first to dare the shock of armies and commence the war. We need you in the front. For this your names are called before the rest, to share the pleasures of the genial feast. And can you, chiefs, without a blush survey whole troops before you laboring in the fray? Say, is it thus those honors you requite, the first in banquets, but the last in fight? That's a word of mockery. Are you the first at the banquet, but last in the fight, last in the battle? Ulysses heard this. The hero's warmth o'erspread his cheek with blushes, and severe he said. So Ulysses was humiliated by what was really just a misunderstanding, because it wasn't understood that they hadn't heard the alarm. And so he's ashamed that Agamemnon would think that they were holding back from joining in the battle. He says, take back the unjust reproach. Behold, we stand, sheathed in bright arms, and but expect command. If glorious deeds afford thy soul delight, behold me plunging in the thickest fight. Then give thy warrior chief a warrior's due, who dares to act whate'er thou darest to view. I'll do the greatest of deeds. Don't worry about that, says Ulysses. Struck with his generous wrath, so his righteous anger pleases Agamemnon. The king replies, O great in action and in counsel wise. Notice that Ulysses, unlike Nestor, who is Now as an old man, no longer capable of action but capable of wise counsel, Ulysses is even more valuable, great in action and in counsel wise. With ours thy care and ardor are the same, nor need I to commend, nor aught anything to blame. Sage as thou art, wise as thou art, and learned in humankind, forgive the transport of a martial mind. Forgive me. I'm just, caught up in the heat of the battle, as it were, and I spoke unknowingly, Agamemnon says. I didn't mean to disrespect you. Haste to the fight, secure of just amends. The gods that make shall keep the worthy friends. In other words, the gods bring great men together as friends, and they shall also keep them together as friends. Agamemnon spoke and passed where great Tydides lay, his steeds and chariots wedged in firm array. The warlike Sthenelus attends his side, to whom with stern reproach the monarch cried, O son of Tydeus, he whose strength could tame the bounding steed, in arms a mighty name, canst thou, remote, in other words, far away from the battle, the mingling hosts descry with hands unactive and a careless eye? Not thus thy sire the fierce encounter feared, still first in front the matchless prince appeared. So Agamemnon finds another man not prepared, a man whose father he knew as a noble soldier, and he rebukes this man. What glorious toils, what wonders they recite, who viewed him laboring through the ranks of fight. I saw him once, when gathering martial powers, a peaceful guest he sought Mycenae's towers. Armies he asked, and armies had been given, not we denied, but Jove forbade from heaven, while dreadful comets glaring from afar forewarned the horrors of the Theban war. Next, sent by Greece from where Asopus flows, a fearless envoy, he approached the foes. Thebes' hostile walls, unguarded and alone, dauntless he enters and demands the throne. The tyrant feasting with his chiefs he found. This is Agamemnon telling the story of this man's father. Dared and subdued before their haughty lord, for Pallas, Athena, strung his arm and edged his sword, strengthened him. Stung with shame, within the winding way, to bar his passage 50 warriors lay. Two heroes led the secret squadron on, Maon the fierce and hardy Lycophon. Those 50 slaughtered in the gloomy valley. He spared but one to bear the dreadful tale. He left one man to live so he could tell everyone what happened. Such Tydeus was, and such his martial fire, his military power. Gods, how the son degenerates from the sire. So Agamemnon complains that the son here is nothing like his father, but stands back and is unwilling to go to war. No words, the godlike Diomed returned, but heard respectful and in secret burned. Not so fierce Capaneus' undaunted son, stern as his sire the boaster thus begun. What needs, O monarch, so here he is responding to Agamemnon, what needs, O monarch, this invidious praise, ourselves to lessen while our sire you raise? Dare to be just, Atrides, and confess our value equal, though our fury less. With fewer troops we stormed the Theban wall, and happier saw the sevenfold city fall. In impious acts the guilty father died, the sons subdued, for heaven was on their side. Far more than heirs of all our parents' fame, our glories darken their diminished name. To him Tydides thus, my friend, forbear, suppress thy passion and the king revere. So Tydides corrects this man for speaking back to Agamemnon. Suppress thy passion, and the king revere or respect. His high concern may well excuse this rage, whose cause we follow, and whose war we wage. His the first praise where Ilion's towers o'erthrown, and if we fail, the chief disgrace his own, speaking of the king. Let him the Greeks to hardy toils excite, 'tis ours to labor in the glorious fight. In other words, of course, Agamemnon is excited. You know, if he loses in battle, he's the one who pays the price. The king is the one who ultimately is ashamed and has to pay the greatest cost. He should be excited about the war. He spoke, and ardent, on the trembling ground, sprung from his car, his ringing arms resound. Dire was the clang, and dreadful from afar, of armed Tydides rushing to the war. As, a simile, as when the winds, ascending by degrees, first move the whitening surface of the seas, the billows float in order to the shore, the wave behind rolls on the wave before. So Homer paints this image for us of the waves following one another as they approach the shore, and he says this is how Agamemnon's troops were, just coming line after line after line, like the waves being driven by the wind, one after the other upon the shore. So to the fight the thick battalions throng, shields urged on shields, and men drove men along, just line after line. Sedate, calm, and silent move the numerous bands, no sound, no whisper, only the chief's commands. Nothing is heard but the commands of the chief. Those only heard with awe, the rest obey, as if some god had snatched their voice away. So the Greek armies were numerous, great, heroic, all ready to go, orderly, quiet, listening to instructions. Not so the Trojans. From their host, from their army, ascends a general shout that all the region rends. There's chaos in the Trojan army. As when the fleecy flocks unnumbered stand in wealthy folds and wait the milker's hand, the hollow vales incessant bleating fills. The lambs reply from all the neighboring hills. Such clamors rose from various nations round. Mixed was the murmur, and confused the sound. Each host now joins, and each a god inspires. These Mars incites, those Minerva fires. Pale flight around and dreadful terror reign, and discord raging bathes the purple plain. Discord. Notice that this idea of discord or division is personified here as if it's a goddess. Discord, dire sister of the slaughtering power, small at her birth, but rising every hour. While scarce the skies her horrid head can bound, she stalks on earth and shakes the world around. The nations bleed where'er her steps she turns, the groan still deepens and the combat burns. Speaking of discord. Now shield, with helmet closed, to armor, lance to lance opposed. Host against host, with shadowy squadrons drew, the sounding darts in iron tempests flew. Homer here describing the sounds of the battle. Just imagine all of these armed men, all of these metalled men charging into each other, the sound of the swords and the shields and the spears and the arrows striking, all of this terrible noise. The sounding darts in iron tempests flew, victors and vanquished, those who are winning and those who are falling, joined promiscuous cries, shrilling shouts and dying groans arise. With streaming blood, the slippery fields are dyed. and slaughtered heroes swell the dreadful tide. As torrents roll, increased by numerous rills, with rage impetuous down their echoing hills, rush to the vales, and poured along the plain, roar through 1,000 channels to the main. The distant shepherd trembling hears the sound. So mix both hosts, and so their cries rebound. The bold Antilochus the slaughter led, the first who struck a valiant Trojan dead. At great Echepolus the lance arrives. And just so you know, if you read this and you don't know who all these people are, I don't either. It's very difficult to know all the names. You can look them up and find them, but if I don't mention something about them, I'm not sure off the top of my head who they might be either. You could look them up. You could Google the names and find some information, but if there's important information to know, usually Homer provides it. So if there's no information provided, I usually assume that the character is not that important. At great Echepolus the lance arrives, raised his high crest, and through his helmet drives. He's hit in the head with a spear. Warmed in the brain because of the blood, the brazen weapon lies, and shades eternal settle o'er his eyes. So sinks a tower that long assaults had stood, of force and fire. Notice this reference here to a tower. This is an example of metaphor. He's referred to as a tower. There's no real use of simile here. He's just called a tower. That's a metaphor. So sinks a tower that long assaults had stood, of force and fire its walls besmeared with blood. Him, the bold leader of the Abantian throng, seized to despoil. That is, after the warrior is fallen, his opponent will often grab anything valuable off of his dying or dead body. Could be weapons, could be armor, could be money, whatever. Seized to despoil and dragged the corpse along. But while he strove to tug the inserted dart, Agenor's javelin reached the hero's heart. His flank, unguarded by his ample shield, admits the lance. He falls and spurns the field. The nerves, unbraced, support his limbs no more. The soul comes floating in a tide of gore. Notice the references to the soul. The Greeks understood the spiritual life. They understood the nature of man, that man was body and soul. Trojans and Greeks now gather round the slain. The war renews. The warriors bleed again. As o'er their prey rapacious wolves engage, man dies on man, and all is blood and rage. What a description of war. In blooming youth fair Simoisius fell, sent by great Ajax to the shades of hell. Fair Simoisius, whom his mother bore amid the flocks on silver Simois' shore. The nymph descending from the hills of Ide to seek her parents on his flowery side, brought forth the babe, their common care and joy, and thence from Simois named the lovely boy. Short was his date, he didn't live long, by dreadful Ajax slain. He falls and renders all their cares in vain. So falls a poplar tree, that in watery ground, raised high the head, with stately branches crowned, felled, cut down, by some artist with his shining steel, with his axe, to shape the circle of the bending wheel, a carpenter cutting down this tree. Homer saying that this young man, Simoisius, was like a tree being cut down by a carpenter. Cut down it lies, tall, smooth, and largely spread with all its beauteous honors on its head. There, left a subject to wind and rain, left unburied on the ground and scorched by suns, it withers on the plain. Thus, pierced by Ajax, Simoisius lies, stretched on the shore, and thus, neglected, dies. At Ajax, Antiphus his javelin threw, the pointed lance with erring fury flew. In other words, it missed. And Leucus, loved by wise Ulysses, slew. So Antiphus threw his javelin, missed Ajax, and struck Leucus, a man who was loved by Ulysses. He drops the corpse of Simoisius slain and sinks a breathless carcass on the plain. This saw Ulysses, and with grief enraged strode where the foremost of the foes engaged. Armed with his spear, he meditates the wound, in act to throw, but cautious looked around. That idea of looking around and seeing what's going on, that's called circumspection. Struck at his sight, the Trojans backward drew, and trembling heard the javelin as it flew. A chief stood high who from Abydos came. Old Priam's son, Demachoon was his name. The weapon entered close above his ear. Cold through his temples glides the whizzing spear. So this is some gory description of the scenes of the battle. With piercing shrieks, the youth resigns his breath. His eyeballs darken with the shades of death. Ponderous he falls, his clanging arms resound, and his broad buckler rings against the ground. Seized with affright, the boldest foes appear, even godlike Hector seems himself to fear. Slow he gave way, the rest tumultuous fled. The Greeks with shouts press on and spoil the dead. So the Greeks were apparently routing the Trojans, but Phoebus, that is the god Apollo, Phoebus now from Ilion's towering height shines forth, revealed, and animates the fight. Trojans, he says, be bold, and force with force oppose. Your foaming steeds urge headlong on the foes. So charge, he says. Nor are their bodies rocks, nor ribbed with steel. Your weapons enter, and your strokes they feel. Have ye forgot what seemed your dread before? The fierce Achilles fights no more. So Apollo rouses the Trojans to fight, encourages them to know that they can defeat the Greeks, and he reminds them that Achilles isn't with them, that they're fighting without their greatest warrior, and so they shouldn't be fighting with any fear, looking over their shoulder, worried about being struck by someone great like Achilles. He's not there. Apollo reminds them. Apollo thus from Ilion's lofty towers, arrayed in terrors, roused the Trojan powers. While war's fierce goddess fires the Grecian foe, and shouts and thunders in the fields below, then great Diores fell, by doom divine. Notice how the gods interact with these human affairs, sort of directing the activity, inspiring the men, helping their favorites, and so on. Diores fell by doom divine, in vain his valor and illustrious line. A broken rock the force of Pyrrhus threw, who from cold Ainus led the Thracian crew. Full on his ankle dropped the ponderous stone, burst the strong nerves, and crushed the solid bone. Supine he tumbles on the crimson sands, bloody sands, before his helpless friends and native bands, and spreads for aid his unavailing hands. This is one of the few times we ever see 3 rhyming lines. The foe rushed furious as he pants for breath, and through his navel, through his belly, drove the pointed death. Notice how the spear is referred to as death. That's a figure of speech where the effect is used to name the cause. His gushing entrails smoked upon the ground, steamed upon the ground, and the warm life came issuing from the wound. Notice that these two words look to be similar, but they don't actually rhyme. His lance, bold Thoas at the conqueror sent through his spear, deep in his breast above the pap it went. Among the lungs was fixed the winged wood, and quivering in his heaving bosom stood, till from the dying chief, approaching near, the Aetolian warrior tugged his weighty spear, then sudden waved his flaming falchion round, falchion is a sword, and gashed his belly with a ghastly wound. The corpse now breathless on the bloody plain, to spoil his arms the victor strove in vain. The Thracian bands against the victor pressed, a grove of lances glittered at his breast. Stern Thoas, glaring with revengeful eyes, in sullen fury slowly quits the prize. Thus fell two heroes, one the pride of Thrace, and one the leader of the Epean race. Death's sable shade at once o'ercast their eyes. In dust the vanquished and the victor lies. With copious slaughter all the fields are red, and heaped with growing mountains of the dead. Had some brave chief this martial scene beheld, by Pallas guarded through the dreadful field, might darts be bid to turn their points away, and swords around him innocently play. The war's whole art with wonder had he seen, and counted heroes where he counted men. That is, every man was a hero. So fought each host, so fought each army, with thirst of glory fired, and crowds on crowds triumphantly expired. So very interestingly here, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but before, when the Greek armies were described, they were described as wave upon wave of men entering the battle. And here in the last line of the book, we read crowds on crowds of the dead. So here we have the end of Book 4. We've read about the breaking of the treaty or the truce between the Greeks and the Trojans by the man who was inspired by Minerva to take a shot at Menelaus. We then read about the preparation for the battle and the entrance into the battle. We read about the gods' influence on different parts of the battle. And we see this terrible scene, this horrible scene of these two courageous, powerful armies cutting each other down, the land filled with blood, as it's described so beautifully by Homer. And as we think of Homer's story, as I wrap this up, as we think of Homer's story, remember, Homer wrote in Greek. Remember that we're reading a translation of Homer by the English poet Alexander Pope. And this poetry written by Pope, this translation, is itself incredibly beautiful. And we need to make sure that we pay attention to the poetry of the translator, because it's so enjoyable to read, so beautiful. And we've got to remember we're enjoying both of these things here. We're enjoying the poem, the story composed by Homer, but also the beautiful English poetry of the translator Alexander Pope. So that's all for Book 4. I hope that was a helpful guided reading. We're just about an hour and 10 minutes now, so we did pretty well getting through that, about 16 pages of text. And that brings us to the end of Book 4. I hope that was helpful. God bless.